So if you're a student, you get this, right? You're used to getting grades. Well, guess what? That whole idea of getting a grade on your performance, it doesn't just disappear when you get a job. It just kind of changes shape. And trust me, during your career, you're going to be on one side of that table or the other, either giving a performance review or getting one. So understanding how it's done, why it's done, and how to do it better is absolutely essential.
So, here's the plan for this explainer. We're going to kick things off with the basics. Then we'll dig into the usual tools companies use. And this is the good part. We're going to expose a huge problem with how those tools often get used. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at a way better way to do things. Sound good? Let's jump in.
All right, first things first. Before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. When we say performance assessment, what are we really talking about?
So at its heart, performance assessment is the formal judgment part. It's that moment where a manager officially evaluates an employee's work. You can kind of think of it like the final exam for your job performance. But here's the thing, that one single judgment, it's really just one small piece of a much bigger puzzle.
And that brings us to a really important difference we need to talk about. See, analysis is all the stuff that happens all the time. The regular chats, the check-ins, the coaching. Assessment, on the other hand, is that big, formal, one-time summary. And you know, the really great managers, they live in that world of constant analysis, not just that one single moment of judgment.
You know, this idea, it's not some newfangled thing. I mean, we're talking way back in 1957, when management professor Douglas McGregor was basically saying, look, the whole point of this shouldn't be a manager just pointing a finger at all your past mistakes. No, it should be about looking forward, about planning for the future, and making the employee a real active part of their own growth. I mean, for 1957, that was a total game changer.
Okay, so if the whole point is growth, how do companies actually, measure it? What tools are in the toolkit? Well, the most common one, and I guarantee you'll run into this, is the good old rating scale.
Yeah, this probably looks pretty familiar, right? It's basically just giving someone a grade, usually on a scale from 1 to 5. And even though people have been criticizing these things for decades, and we'll get to why in a minute, rating scales are still the main way most companies wrap up performance. It's the method that just won't quit.
Now, to be fair, there's a reason they're so popular. Companies use them because, in theory, they give people clarity, they help spot the superstars, and they create a super simple way to make decisions about who gets a raise or a promotion. They're basically trying to boil down a whole lot of complexity into one simple, easy-to-use number.
So to try and make these ratings feel a little less like a gut feeling, some companies started using something called BARS, which stands for Behaviorally Anchored Rating Scales. The whole idea here is simple. Stop rating people on vague stuff like teamwork and start rating them on actual, concrete things they do.
So here's the real shift. Instead of a manager just thinking, is Bob a good communicator? BARS makes them ask something like, okay, how often did Bob actually do these specific things, like running a meeting as a two-way conversation? See, it's a huge shift from judging someone's personality to just observing their actions. And the way it works is actually pretty simple. First, you figure out what are the most important behaviors for this job. Then, managers just watch and keep track of how often their employee does those things. And finally, they rate the frequency. It's really an attempt to make the whole thing a bit more scientific, a little less subjective.
But here's the twist. Even with a tool like BARS, there's a way for this whole rating thing to go completely off the rails. And that happens when companies take these ratings and mash them together with a really controversial system. You might have heard of it, the bell curve, or what's called forced distribution.
So here's the deal with forced distribution. A manager is literally told, hey, you have to label 15% of your team as rock stars, 70% as average, and the bottom 15% as, well, the bottom. The whole system is balanced on this one giant assumption that performance naturally looks like a bell curve. But does it, really? Well, the research is pretty darn clear. Nope, not even close. There's basically zero evidence that human performance in a company actually fits this neat little curve. I mean, think about it for a second. If you're hiring great people and helping them grow, shouldn't your performance curve be skewed towards the high end? And what happens when you build a system on a totally flawed idea? Well, the results aren't pretty. Research shows it just makes people compete against each other instead of working together. And after a while, you're not getting rid of the low performers anymore. You're forced to cut people who are actually doing a perfectly good job. You're literally cutting into the bone of your own company. And get this, any little boost in performance you might see from it, it totally fizzles out after just a couple of years.
Okay, so if rating scales and these forced curves are so full of problems, what's the alternative? Where do we go from here? Well, let's talk about the solution. Because the trend now is all about moving away from that single lonely number and moving toward having a much, much better conversation.
And a really powerful way to do that is to build the whole conversation around two simple questions. First, what did you get done? You know, your results, your goals. And second, how did you get it done? This gets into your behavior, how you worked with others, if you lived up to the company's values. Suddenly, you have a much richer, more complete picture of what's actually going on.
And you can actually visualize this whole idea with a super simple but really powerful tool, a 2x2 grid. On one axis, you have performance, the what, and on the other, you have behavior, the how. Right away, this completely changes the conversation. You're not just a 3 or a 4 anymore. You're a point on this grid that tells a whole story.
And the benefits of doing this? They're huge. It forces a much bigger, more complete discussion. Think about it. Someone who smashes all their targets but is a total nightmare to work with, they're not a top performer in this world. The goal for everybody becomes crystal clear. How do we get you to that top right box? It's a map for growth, not just a report card.
All right, let's bring it all home. What are the big ideas you should really hold on to as you head out into your career?
Okay, if you remember only one thing from all this, make it this. Great performance management is not about that one-time-a-year grade. It's an ongoing conversation, a dialogue based on actual evidence between a manager and their employee. The whole point is to coach people to get better, not just to judge what they did in the past.
So, to sum it all up, first, those simple number ratings. They're tempting for sure, but a lot of the time they can actually do more harm than good. Second, the really smart companies are splitting up the how can you grow conversation from the how much we're going to pay you conversation. You can't do both well at the same time. And finally, using tools like that matrix we talked about, something that looks at both results and behaviors, is just a much better way to actually help people develop their talent than a simple score ever could be.
And that brings us to one last question. And this one's for you. After hearing all of this, if you were the one calling the shots, designing the perfect performance review system from scratch, what's the one thing you would insist on having in there to make it truly fair, genuinely helpful for growth, and actually motivating? Definitely something to chew on as you get ready to step into that world.